When I quit my job at a marketing agency to build a coffee brand with my best friend, I didn't expect to spend the next 18 months learning how to scrub toilets in a warehouse and crying in my car in front of Dollar General. Let me back up. I was 28, working at a boutique digital agency in North Carolina. My co-founder, Matt, and I had been talking about doing something for years. We were roommates in college and both worked in marketing afterward, mostly grinding in low-margin service work. We wanted out. We didn't want to keep selling hours. We wanted to build something that would sell while we slept. Matt's family owned a tiny coffee roaster in western North Carolina. Very local, mostly farmers markets, and some subscription customers. Good beans, good roasting process, but completely unknown outside a 20-mile radius. We thought, what if we took that and built a brand around it? Something way more modern, direct-to-consumer, and story-driven. So we pitched his uncle on the idea. Give us 6 months to build a DTC coffee company using his supply chain, and we'd give him equity in exchange for access to the beans, roasting, and fulfillment. He was old-school skeptical but agreed. We called it First Light Coffee, branding it as a morning ritual brand for creators, freelancers, and self-starters. Cheesy. Sure, but we leaned in hard. Clean packaging, lots of motivational content on socials, and we built a Shopify store with subscriptions front and center. We launched in October 2021 with $9,000 between us and some free credits on Meta ads from a friend. The first month, 83 orders, mostly friends and family, but we made $200 in revenue. It felt amazing. By month 4, we had cracked Meta ads a little. We were pulling in about $9K/month, almost break even. We felt like we were onto something. Then came month 5. Our roaster had a fire. Not a huge one, but enough to knock it offline for 3 weeks. Customers canceled subscriptions. Our Facebook ad campaigns lost traction. Stripe flagged a sudden drop in volume and held $400 in reserve. We almost shut it down then. But Matt flew back to North Carolina. He was living in Austin by then. And we drove to 11 different coffee roasters in a weekend to find one who would do a small private label run for us to keep the business alive. Only one agreed, and at 30% higher costs. Still, it kept us going. By month 7, we were limping along with a new supplier, but it didn't feel the same. And then, something unexpected happened. A customer tagged us in a TikTok where she unboxed our coffee and made a pour-over, talking about how she loved coffee that wasn't just for hipsters or boomers. It went semi-viral, 160K views. We got 487 orders in 48 hours. We had no idea how to fulfill them. We literally hand-packed bags for 16 hours straight in Matt's apartment. I dropped off 14 USPS tubs at 3 different post offices because the main one wouldn't take them all. But it was the spark. We realized TikTok was our organic growth engine. So we pivoted all our content to lean into that. Daily videos, customer UGC, even some goofy skits. In 2 months, we jumped to $25K/month in revenue. We thought we were flying. Then the chargebacks hit. Turns out, we were too aggressive in pushing a subscription-first model. People didn't realize they signed up for recurring. We got 43 chargebacks in 1 month. Shopify hit us with a warning. We nearly got blacklisted from their payments platform. So we revamped everything. Clearer messaging, triple opt-ins, pre-renewal reminders. That cost us conversion rate, but we recovered trust. At month 11, we made our first hire, Becca, a customer support rep who was actually one of our earliest customers. She helped clean up our ops and manage the chaos that came with trying to grow while holding everything together with duct tape. By month 14, we'd passed $60K/month in revenue. Profit margin? 8%. Not great, but we were building. We had a warehouse partner by then. No more packing orders in Matt's apartment. Then came the investor emails. A couple of angel investors and micro VCS reached out after seeing us featured in a DTC newsletter. We took a few calls, entertained the idea of a small pre-seed round. We were tired, broke, and stretched thin. The money was tempting. But one investor asked a question that reset our thinking. What happens if you take this capital and it doesn't work? Do you still want to be doing this in 5 years? I didn't sleep that night. It forced us to face something. We loved the idea of building a coffee brand, but we didn't love the reality of running it. Every day was logistics, supply chain, customer complaints, ad performance, and negotiating with USPS. The creative stuff, what got us excited in the first place, was 10% of our time. So we made a decision I never thought we'd make. We started looking for a buyer. It wasn't easy. Most aggregators had pulled back by 2023. But in May, we found a small consumer goods group in Denver that specialized in rolling up niche brands. They liked our community, loved our content strategy, and offered us a six-figure buyout $470,000 total, with $100K up front and the rest in performance earnouts. We took it. It felt weird at first, like we were quitting. But the moment the transfer went through and I woke up without 142 Slack notifications, I knew we'd made the right call. Matt took a job at a product studio in Austin. I started consulting again, this time on my terms. We meet every month and joke about our coffee cult days. Would I do it again? Honestly, yeah, but I'd do it differently. I'd validate demand more rigorously before going hard on inventory. I'd spend more time understanding what running the business would feel like day to day. And I'd get help sooner. But building something from scratch, watching strangers buy your thing, reading their reviews, shipping orders until 2 a.m., it's unlike anything else. Even if it ends with you crying in your car outside a Dollar General, wondering if this is what entrepreneurship is supposed to feel like. Because, for us, it was. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. For context, I, 34 now, started my first real business when I was 26, and it absolutely wrecked me financially, emotionally, and almost physically. But that business, or more specifically the failure of it, ended up being the foundation for a second venture that eventually made me a millionaire, at least on paper. This is the story of both, and how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the first domino of something way better. Let's start with the first mess. I had just left my job in digital marketing at a mid-sized agency. I wasn't unhappy, but I had this persistent feeling that I was wasting time building someone else's dream. Classic early 20s delusion. I had a couple freelance clients on the side and convinced myself that if I just had more time, I could scale it into an agency of my own. I even had a name for it, Hawk and Hollow. Don't ask what it meant. I think I liked the way it sounded mysterious and high-end. With about $15,000 in savings, not enough, no business plan, and a delusional amount of confidence, I quit my job in March 2017. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, miraculously, was supportive but skeptical. I convinced her I could get clients, that we'd be fine, that I had a vision. She should have laughed in my face. The first 6 months were actually okay. I got a couple small clients through former coworkers. I built a nice-looking website. I talked to other freelancers on LinkedIn and said things like, I'm the CEO of a boutique digital firm, which is a fancy way of saying I worked from a folding table in a one-bedroom apartment. The problem started when I decided I needed to scale. Scaling, in my mind at the time, meant hiring people fast. I brought on a friend from college as a full-time contractor, mistake number 1. Hired a freelance designer from Upwork without vetting her, mistake number 2. And signed a 6-month co-working lease, mistake number 3. Cash flow started bleeding. My biggest client, who accounted for about 50% of my revenue, ghosted me in month 7 and disappeared after 2 months of late payments. Just like that, I was underwater. I started taking on terrible clients just to keep the lights on. If you've ever worked with small business owners who think digital marketing means running $50 Facebook ads and going viral, you know what I mean. By month 10, I owed about $9,000 on a credit card, hadn't paid myself in 2 months, and my team had all quit except for the college friend who stopped returning my calls. My lease was up in 3 weeks, and I had $212 in my bank account. I remember crying, not a little tear, but like full body shaking, in the parking lot of the co-working space. I hadn't told anyone how bad it had gotten. I lied to my girlfriend, said things were tight but stabilizing. She knew I was lying. I moved back into a tiny studio in a worse part of town and took a part-time job at a copywriting firm that paid $18/HR. It was the lowest I'd felt in my adult life. Here's where the story turns. At that job, I worked under a guy named Mike who had this dry, quiet demeanor and a brutal eye for bullshit. He saw right through me. After about a month, he took me out for a beer and said, "You're smart, but you talk too much and listen too little. Why did your business fail?" I gave some answer about bad clients, timing, hiring too fast. He shook his head. "Your offer sucked. No one knew what problem you solved." That line haunted me. No one knew what problem you solved. So I went back to the drawing board, not with a business plan, but with research. I interviewed 10 former clients and asked them what they had actually needed from me. Over and over, they said, "We just wanted more leads. You gave us reports." Boom. That was it. They didn't want pretty dashboards. They didn't care about engagement metrics or impressions. They wanted the phone to ring. So I tested a new concept. Instead of offering full-service digital marketing, I picked one vertical, plumbers, of all things, and offered a very specific result. "I'll get you 10 new phone calls per week, or you don't pay." I launched this quietly in March 2019. Built a landing page. Ran $300 in Google Ads. I had one guy bite in Cleveland, Ohio. I charged him $300 for a month, and I drove leads using a hack-together campaign and a rented phone number forwarding to his line. He called me on day 10 and said, "This is the best money I've spent on advertising in 5 years. Can I send you to my cousin in Pittsburgh?" That cousin became my second client. By May, I had 5. By August, I had 17. I called this Business Pipeline Boost. Much better name. Thank you very much. It was lean, automated, and super clear on what it did. It made your phone ring with high-intent customers. Nothing else. I eventually added verticals, HVAC, roofing, landscaping, and turned it into a subscription model with tiered pricing. I didn't hire anyone until I had enough monthly revenue to cover 6 months of their salary in cash. I stayed in that same cheap studio for another 18 months, eating rice and frozen chicken thighs and obsessing over churn rates and conversion data. In 2021, a software startup in the home services space reached out. They wanted to white-label my lead system for their network of 800-plus contractors. We negotiated a licensing deal that brought in $24K/month in recurring revenue, and they offered a buyout 6 months later. I sold 70% of the company for just over $1.4 million in cash and equity. I kept 30% and stayed on as a consultant with minimal day-to-day obligations. I moved into a better apartment, married the girlfriend who stuck with me, got a dog, bought my mom a new car. I didn't buy a Lumbo or move to Bali. I just got a little quieter, a little less afraid. Here's what I learned the hard way. 1. No one cares about your dream. They care about their problem. The sooner your business reflects that, the sooner it becomes real. 2. Don't scale failure. I thought adding bodies would solve bad operations. It multiplies your headaches. 3. Feedback is only useful when you ask the right people. Your friends will lie to protect you. Your customers won't. 4. Cash flow is king. Always. If it doesn't make money, it's a hobby, not a business. 5. Failure doesn't mean you're done. Sometimes it's the tuition for the business you were actually meant to build. And the last one, maybe the most important, don't quit just because the first version of your idea sucked. You might only be one pivot away from something that works. If you're reading this and your first business is in the trash can, good. That means you're doing it for real. Dust yourself off. Pick a real problem. Solve it better than the last guy. That's how it starts. 3 years ago, I was hiding from my landlord in a one-bedroom apartment that I couldn't afford, staring at a shut-off notice from the power company and wondering how the hell I ended up here after graduating with honors from one of the top business schools in the country. My name's Eric, and I was supposed to be someone. I was the guy in college who had a 5-year plan taped above his desk and wore slacks to class because I wanted to get used to it. After graduating, I landed a job at a major consulting firm. 6 figures out of the gate, fancy apartment, business class flights, exactly what I thought I wanted. I lasted 11 months. The job sucked the life out of me. I was making slides for people who didn't care and analyzing numbers I didn't believe in. One day, after another 15-hour workday and a public chewing out by a partner who spelled his own name wrong in an email, I quit. No plan. Just rage and idealism. I told myself I was going to build something. I had this idea for a platform that helped small e-commerce brands handle customer support using AI. Nothing crazy, basically a way to automate FAQs and returns with a bit more personality than a chatbot. I figured I'd code it up, launch a beta, and raise money by the end of the year. Narrator: he did not. I burned through my savings in 6 months. Turns out, basic platform takes time to build when you're not a full-stack developer and you're hiring random people off Fiverr and Reddit. I didn't know how to manage engineers. I didn't even know how to write a proper product spec. I was winging it and bleeding cash. I drove for Uber at night to pay rent and taught myself enough Python to stop outsourcing every minor tweak. I begged a former coworker to lend me $5,000 to cover my AWS bill and promised him 3% equity, which in retrospect was a terrible deal for him and a desperate one for me. At one point, I was so broke I sold my bed frame and slept on a mattress on the floor. Then I sold the mattress and slept on a yoga mat. Then I sold the yoga mat. That was my low point. Cold hardwood floors in a downtown LA studio while trying to close deals with Shopify store owners in Australia at 2 a.m. But something weird happened. It started working. One of my beta clients, a subscription coffee company, began using the platform and sent me an email saying their CS tickets dropped by 40% and customer satisfaction actually improved. They referred me to another brand, and then another. By the end of year 2, I had 15 paying customers. Not much, but enough to eat again. I moved back into an apartment with a bed. I stopped Ubering. I spent my days on support calls, fixing bugs, and manually onboarding each new customer like they were royalty. Here's where it gets interesting. A mid-sized DTC skincare brand reached out after hearing about us. They were doing serious volume and had a nightmare CS setup, multiple tools, no ticket tagging, zero automation. I worked 80 hours that week customizing the platform for them. No sleep, a lot of caffeine. At the end of the month, they signed a $4,000/month contract. That changed everything. I used that as leverage to pitch a few angel investors. One bit. $150K at a $1.5M valuation. I brought on a real engineer and a customer success manager, both freelancers I'd worked with in the trenches. We rebuilt the platform from the ground up, focusing on plug-and-play integrations with Shopify, Klaviyo, and Gorgias. By year 3, we had 60 customers and $40K MRR. I was finally paying myself a salary. Small, but enough. And then, as these things often go, a bigger company in our space took notice. They didn't acquire us. They tried to crush us. They released a competing feature set, slashed prices, and used their 10x marketing budget to target our keywords. I freaked out. We lost 2 customers immediately. Another paused their contract. I thought we were dead. But here's what I didn't realize. Most of our clients didn't care about features or even price. They cared about us showing up on Zoom calls, about getting a Slack reply in 5 minutes, about us giving a damn. That's what the big guys couldn't replicate. We leaned into it. Personalized onboarding. 24/7 support from me and my tiny team. Custom tweaks for each client. Every founder got my cell number. It was messy and exhausting, but it worked. Churn dropped. We gained 20 new clients in the next quarter. Last December, we crossed $1M ARR. I threw a party in the same apartment I was almost evicted from 2 years earlier. My engineer brought whiskey, and we got a noise complaint. It was worth it. We're still small. We're not a unicorn, but we're profitable. I have a team of 7. We cover health insurance. We take holidays. And we still onboard every client personally. Sometimes people ask me if I regret quitting that consulting job. I don't. I regret not learning to code earlier. I regret not asking for help sooner. I regret some of the deals I made out of desperation. But I don't regret walking out that day. Because now, when I wake up, I don't feel like I'm faking it anymore. I built something real. It almost killed me. But it also saved me. If you're on the floor, figuratively or literally, I'm not going to lie and tell you to just keep going. Sometimes quitting is smart. Sometimes failure is the right move. But if there's even a flicker of traction, if even one customer cares, you might just be close to something big. Or at least something real. I've always had a knack for identifying opportunities, but never really knew how to channel that into a business until a few years ago. This is the story of how I went from being an underpaid, burnt-out employee to running a successful small business and living life on my terms. In my late 20s, I was working at a marketing agency in a mid-sized city. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable. I had the typical office grind life, working 9 to 5, staying up late on projects, and dealing with clients who didn't understand the value of the work we were doing. To be honest, I was tired. I always felt like I was doing more than I was getting credit for. I saw people around me getting promoted, getting raises, and I felt stuck. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I was always thinking about how I could be doing things better. I'd have ideas for new strategies, products, and services that could make the agency more money, but none of those ideas were ever taken seriously. My boss, a micromanaging control freak, was set in his ways. If I had a new idea, I could forget about it. I was always told, "This is how we've done it for years." It felt like I was constantly hitting a wall. Eventually, the stress took its toll. I was always stressed out at work, often feeling underappreciated, and my personal life was suffering. I didn't have time for friends or even for myself. I was just a cog in a machine, doing the same thing day in and day out. One day, I was browsing the internet when I stumbled across a story of a guy who started a successful e-commerce store. He had started with almost no money and built a brand that had taken off. I had no prior experience in e-commerce, but something about the story sparked an idea. I started researching. I spent hours reading blogs, watching YouTube videos, and going through forums about how people were starting their own businesses. I discovered that e-commerce was a way to make money without needing to be tied to a desk. And that sounded like exactly what I needed. I started small. I created a basic online store selling custom-designed t-shirts. I had no real experience in design or fashion, but I had access to print-on-demand services that allowed me to create and sell t-shirts without holding any inventory. The beauty of it was that I didn't need a massive startup fund to begin. I could start with just a few $100s. At first, the sales were slow, like painfully slow. I remember days where I wouldn't sell a single shirt. It was discouraging, to say the least. But I didn't give up. I continued tweaking my designs and figuring out ways to market my store. I tried paid advertising, but the results were inconsistent. I tried influencer marketing, but the costs outweighed the returns. Then, after months of frustration, I realized that I was missing something important: the power of content marketing. I decided to start a blog and create content around my niche. I wrote articles about fashion trends, how to design custom shirts, and why people should express themselves through fashion. I started optimizing my content for SEO and built my website's blog section. I also started posting regularly on Instagram and Facebook, sharing photos of the designs and engaging with people. After several months of consistent content creation, traffic to my website began to grow. It wasn't a viral hit, but I was getting consistent visits, and for the first time in a long while, I saw potential. I slowly started building an email list, offering discounts in exchange for people signing up. It was a slow grind, but I could see progress. By the end of my first year, I had made just enough money to cover my expenses, but I knew I was onto something. Then, I hit another turning point. One day, I got an email from a well-known influencer in the fashion space asking if I'd be willing to collaborate on a giveaway. This was a massive opportunity for me. I knew I couldn't afford to pay for their services, but I could offer them free shirts in exchange for their promotion. They agreed, and we set up the giveaway. The results were astonishing. The influencer's audience was large, and the giveaway drove a ton of traffic to my website. My Instagram followers doubled overnight, and sales skyrocketed. It was the first real validation I'd gotten for my business, and it felt like a turning point. From that point forward, I understood the importance of building relationships with influencers and focusing on organic growth. I started reaching out to more influencers in my niche, offering them collaborations, and my sales continued to rise. I kept improving my products, building my brand, and slowly, I started making more money than I had in my 9-to-5 job. Eventually, I was able to quit my full-time job and focus on my business. Fast forward to now, and my business is thriving. I've expanded from just t-shirts to other custom-designed products like hats, hoodies, and mugs. I've built a loyal customer base, and I now have a small team helping me run the operations. I'm no longer tied to a desk or dependent on anyone else to tell me what to do. I've created my own path. The journey wasn't easy, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. There were days when I thought about giving up, days when I wanted to throw in the towel and go back to the stability of my old job. But every time I faced those challenges, I remembered why I started in the first place: to have the freedom to create, to make my own decisions, and to have control over my life. I'm still learning, still growing, and still figuring things out. But the feeling of being your own boss, of building something from scratch, is incredible. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that persistence and belief in your idea can take you farther than you think. If you're stuck in a job you hate and dreaming of starting your own business, don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect moment. Start small, stay persistent, and keep learning. Success doesn't happen overnight, but with time, effort, and a bit of luck, it's possible. And above all, believe in yourself. You've got this. I never expected my life to turn out like this. Growing up, I was always the kid with big dreams but no clear plan. My parents were hardworking, middle-class folks, and while they always encouraged me to aim high, the reality of our small town made it feel like an uphill battle. My dad was a mechanic and my mom worked as a nurse. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. We had what we needed, but there was no excess. Despite that, I always wanted more. I looked around and saw people who had businesses, cars, homes in the nicer parts of town, and I couldn't help but dream of something bigger. My journey started out on a typical path. I went to college, picked up a business degree, and got a decent job as a marketing associate at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I worked 9 to 5, went to the gym, and spent my weekends at house parties or catching up on Netflix. For a while, it felt like a good life. But deep down, I felt like I was meant for something more. One evening, during a late-night conversation with a couple of friends, I said something offhand that would change everything. I was complaining about the corporate grind, how my work didn't feel fulfilling, and how I was just a small cog in the machine. One of my friends, a software developer named Sam, casually mentioned, "Why don't you just start your own business? You've got a business degree. Why not apply it to something you actually care about?" At first, I laughed it off. Starting my own business? Me? I had no idea where to even begin. Sure, I had learned the fundamentals in school, but theory and reality are two different beasts. Sam, however, wasn't the type to let things slide. He kept pushing the idea. He even went so far as to suggest a niche market he thought I could tap into. What if you created a marketing consultancy, but with a focus on helping local businesses use digital marketing to compete with bigger companies? At the time, it sounded too simple. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he might be onto something. I'd spent years learning the ins and outs of digital marketing, and I was constantly seeing small local businesses in my hometown struggle to reach their target audience. Most of them didn't have the budget to compete with large companies, but they still had potential. Maybe I could help bridge that gap. I decided to take the leap. It was terrifying. I remember sitting at my desk the day I handed in my resignation letter. I was leaving behind a steady paycheck, benefits, and all the security that came with a corporate job to pursue something that had no guarantees. I had saved up enough to live on for a few months, but I wasn't sure how long that would last if things didn't work out. I started small, working from home. The first few months were brutal. I reached out to every small business in the area, pitching my services. Most of them ignored me. Some didn't even respond to my emails, and a few were downright dismissive. But I kept going. Slowly, I started landing small gigs, creating social media campaigns, redesigning websites, and running Google ads. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me afloat and gain experience. A breakthrough came when I landed my first big client, a local bakery that had been struggling to attract new customers. They were on the verge of closing down and had decided to give digital marketing a try. I revamped their website, created a social media strategy, and worked on paid ad campaigns to promote their special deals. Within 3 months, their sales increased by 40%. They were ecstatic, and word started to spread. That one success became my portfolio piece, and suddenly, other businesses started reaching out. But the road to success wasn't smooth. There were countless sleepless nights spent learning new tools, designing campaigns, and optimizing strategies. I made plenty of mistakes that cost time, money, and relationships. I once spent an entire month on a campaign that, in the end, didn't even yield a single conversion. That was a tough pill to swallow. But with every failure, I learned something new. I refined my process, figured out what worked and what didn't, and built a reputation for being someone who could help businesses grow. After a couple of years, I was able to hire a small team. It started with just 1 employee, then 2, and eventually 5. Each person brought something different to the table, and together, we grew the business. I also started branching out to other cities and working with larger clients. As I scaled, the challenges became more complex. Now, I was managing a team, dealing with multiple clients, and handling the finances of a growing business. It was exciting but overwhelming. One of the toughest moments came when we hit a plateau. For several months, it felt like we weren't growing at the same pace. I had expanded too quickly, and suddenly, I was trying to juggle too many things at once. The team was burnt out, and we weren't landing new clients as frequently as before. It felt like I had hit a wall, and I was unsure how to break through it. In the end, it was the relationships I had built that helped me get through. I reached out to some of my mentors, people who had been in the business world far longer than me. They gave me invaluable advice on scaling sustainably and focusing on the right clients. I also started delegating more and trusting my team to take on more responsibility. I realized that running a business isn't just about grinding. It's about building systems, trusting your people, and knowing when to pivot. Today, I own a thriving marketing agency with clients from all over the country. We've helped businesses grow in ways they never thought possible, and I've been able to give back to the community by hiring local talent and supporting local initiatives. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were days when I thought about quitting, when I felt like I wasn't cut out for this. But I stuck with it. I don't think I would have made it this far if I hadn't taken that first step and been willing to bet on myself. Entrepreneurship isn't easy. It's a roller coaster of emotions, decisions, and hard work. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly rewarding. It's not about the money or the status. It's about creating something meaningful and seeing it grow, knowing you were the one who made it happen. If you're on the fence about taking the leap, my advice is simple: do it. The road will be tough, but if you're passionate, willing to learn, and persistent, you can make it. Just take that first step. You won't regret it. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been running my own business for about 10 years now. It hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. My journey started in a small town where I was raised by two parents who had always worked for someone else. My dad worked at a factory, and my mom was a school teacher. They taught me the value of hard work, and though they didn't have much, they made sure I always had what I needed. But growing up, I knew I didn't want to live that life. I wanted something more. I wanted to build something that was my own. After high school, I had a lot of dreams, but no clear path. I didn't have the resources for college, so I decided to take a different route. I started working odd jobs, anything I could find to save up some money. I worked in a restaurant as a dishwasher, then a server, and even did some construction work. All of it was tough, but I kept pushing forward. Every time I finished a job, I thought about the business I wanted to start. The idea that I could build something from the ground up kept me going, even when I felt completely drained. Eventually, I saved enough money to get into the tech space. I didn't have a tech background, but I had a passion for problem solving and a knack for learning. After months of reading books, taking online courses, and watching YouTube tutorials, I figured out how to build basic websites. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I started offering my services to local businesses. I would build them simple websites, and in return, they'd pay me a small fee. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and more importantly, it gave me the experience I needed. I spent countless hours working on my skills, and after a while, I began to get better at it. The websites I created started looking more professional, and my clients began recommending me to others. But then something happened that almost shattered my dream. The economy took a downturn, and clients stopped paying their invoices. Some businesses folded, and the ones that stayed open weren't willing to spend much on their websites. I had bills to pay, and I wasn't sure how I was going to survive. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should just quit and get a regular job. But something inside me wouldn't let me give up. I didn't want to go back to the life I had before. I kept telling myself that I could figure it out. I just needed to pivot. So, I did what I always do when I face a challenge. I doubled down on my efforts. I started learning about digital marketing and social media strategies. I realized that websites were just a small part of a larger ecosystem, and if I could help businesses not only build their online presence but also market it effectively, I would provide more value and attract more clients. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I began landing more and more clients. I expanded my services to include SEO, search engine optimization, pay-per-click ads, and social media management. Slowly, I was able to turn my small side hustle into a full-time business. But the road wasn't without its bumps. There were days when I felt completely overwhelmed, working long hours to meet deadlines, and constantly worrying if I was doing enough to keep my clients happy. The pressure was constant. Then came the real turning point. I got an email from a client who wanted to launch a large-scale e-commerce platform. The budget was huge, more than I had ever dreamed of. But there was a catch. I would have to outsource most of the work. I didn't know how I was going to manage it. I was just a one-man operation, and I didn't have the network or the resources to pull it off. But once again, I pushed through my doubts. I reached out to freelancers who specialized in design, development, and e-commerce platforms. It was the first time I'd worked with a team outside of myself, and at first, it was tough. Managing the project felt like juggling a million things at once, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pull it off. But as the project progressed, I realized that I had built a reliable team. We completed the platform ahead of schedule, and it was a massive success. The client was ecstatic, and they recommended me to their network. That project opened the door to bigger and better opportunities. Over the next few years, I scaled my business, hired a small team, and took on even more complex projects. We started developing custom software for clients, and eventually, I was able to move my business into a bigger office. There were still challenges, of course. I had to learn how to manage people, handle more complex financials, and stay on top of the ever-changing tech industry. But each obstacle became an opportunity to grow and improve. I also faced some major setbacks. At one point, I made the mistake of hiring the wrong person. They were a great salesperson, but their work ethic was terrible. I trusted them to bring in clients and manage accounts, but they ended up costing me more than they brought in. I had to let them go, and the fallout took a toll on my business for a while. I learned that hiring the right people is just as important as having a good idea. It's a lesson I carry with me today. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud of where I am. I've built a thriving business with a great team of people who are just as passionate about what we do as I am. We help clients in various industries, from healthcare to e-commerce, and our reputation for delivering high-quality work has brought us a steady stream of referrals. I no longer worry about where the next paycheck will come from, and I can afford to give back to the community that supported me when I was just starting out. I've also learned that success doesn't happen overnight. There were years when I wasn't sure I was going to make it. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. But those are the moments that have shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. I've learned to embrace failure as a part of the process, and I've learned that success isn't just about making money, it's about creating something meaningful and providing value to others. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: keep going. There will be times when you feel like giving up, but if you push through those tough moments, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's incredibly rewarding if you're willing to put in the work and never stop learning. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. The kid who used to wash dishes for a living is now the CEO of a successful tech company. It hasn't been a smooth ride, but I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. And for anyone out there wondering if they can make it too, I promise you, if I can do it, so can you. Don't give up, keep learning, and trust the process. I was 28 when I started my first business, a small digital marketing agency. To say I had no clue what I was doing would be an understatement. I had a degree in business management, but what they don't teach you in school is that managing a business and managing a degree are two entirely different things. I had spent years working in corporate marketing, learning the ropes and climbing the corporate ladder. By 27, I realized that I was stuck in a rut. I didn't want to be the guy who woke up at 6:30 a.m. to get to the office by 8 a.m., slogged through another soul-crushing day of meetings, and returned home only to watch Netflix and repeat it all again. I wanted freedom. I wanted control over my own time, and more importantly, I wanted to build something that could change the lives of others, not just increase the bottom line of some faceless corporation. So, I quit my job. I didn't have a grand business plan. I didn't have a ton of savings, and I didn't have a rich uncle to fund my venture. But what I did have was determination and a willingness to fail. I rented a small office and a co-working space, which was honestly more of a glorified coffee shop than an actual office. The desk was shared, and I was surrounded by aspiring entrepreneurs who seemed just as clueless as I felt. But there was one thing we all had in common: we were hungry. The first few months were brutal. I was doing everything myself: sales, marketing, client service, bookkeeping, you name it. I was working 18-hour days just to keep the business afloat, and I barely made enough to cover rent and groceries. My savings were draining faster than I anticipated, and I could feel the weight of self-doubt creeping in. But here's the thing about entrepreneurship that you don't hear enough. It's not about how many times you fail. It's about how many times you get back up. I remember getting my first client. It was a small e-commerce brand, and they signed on with me after a fairly rough pitch meeting. I had no case studies to show, no proven results, just my enthusiasm and a detailed plan that I hoped would work. When they handed me that first check, it felt like winning the lottery. I took it as a sign. This could be my shot. But that's when the real work began. I had no systems in place. I was making it up as I went along. I spent all my time executing the marketing strategy for that client, and the results were decent, not great, but decent. The client was happy enough to stick around for another month. In the meantime, I started looking for more clients. I wasn't particularly skilled at sales. I didn't have an established network, and cold calling made me break out into a cold sweat. But I knew one thing. If I could help small businesses grow, I could sell anything. So, I started offering free consultations, helping local businesses with their digital marketing strategy. Some of them converted into paying clients, others didn't. But slowly, I built a portfolio. Slowly, I became known as the guy who could get results. Fast forward to 1 year later, and I had my first full-time employee. I had grown the agency to 5 clients and had enough recurring revenue to pay myself a modest salary. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the business running. That year was a blur of endless work, sleepless nights, and grinding harder than I ever thought I could. The turning point came when I started leveraging my results. One of my clients, a small but growing software company, started seeing massive returns on their paid ads, and I used those results to approach bigger businesses. The first big breakthrough came when I signed a SaaS company with a mid-six-figure marketing budget. It was a game changer for the agency. I had the budget to hire more staff, build better processes, and hire consultants to teach me things I didn't know. I began surrounding myself with people who knew more than me. I spent time learning from successful entrepreneurs, reading books, taking online courses, and hiring coaches. I didn't have all the answers, but I was determined to find them. And that's what made all the difference. As the business grew, I became more comfortable delegating tasks. I started focusing on what I was best at, sales and strategy, and gave my team the tools and autonomy to take on the rest. My focus shifted from being a solopreneur, constantly working in the business, to being a true CEO, working on the business. That shift in mindset was the key. I wasn't just selling digital marketing services anymore. I was building a company that could scale. I started thinking about systems, hiring, training, and customer service. I brought in a project manager, an accountant, and a marketing specialist. We began standardizing processes, setting up automations, and tracking our key performance indicators. Slowly but surely, we started seeing consistent growth. The revenue numbers started to climb. We doubled our revenue in year 2 and then doubled it again in year 3. But even as the business grew, I never lost sight of what I loved about it, helping small businesses thrive. Every time a client came to me with a problem and left with a solution, it felt like a personal victory. By year 4, we had expanded to 15 employees, moved into a larger office, and were handling multiple six-figure accounts. The stress was still there, but now it was more manageable. I had built a team that I trusted, and we had a culture of accountability and collaboration. More than just a digital marketing agency, we had become a family. The journey wasn't easy. There were plenty of setbacks, mistakes, and moments where I doubted myself. But I can say this with certainty. Every failure taught me something that I needed to learn. It wasn't always the big wins that mattered. Sometimes, it was the little victories that pushed me forward. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not on a yacht, and I don't have a private jet. But I built something that I'm proud of. I have the freedom to spend my days how I want. I have a team that I consider family, and I'm making an impact in the lives of the clients we serve. I've learned that entrepreneurship is more than just a business. It's a journey. It's about growth, resilience, and never giving up when things get tough. So to anyone out there who feels stuck, who feels like they don't have the answers, who is about to give up, keep going. Keep learning. Keep failing. Keep trying. Because in the end, it's worth it. I always thought entrepreneurship was for the bold, the risk takers, the ones who had that hustle in their DNA. You know, those people who wake up at 5 a.m., pound coffee like it's their lifeblood, and talk about their big ideas with a sparkle in their eye. Me? I was a regular guy. A guy who had a steady job, a small apartment, and an average life. Nothing too exciting. But a few years ago, everything changed, and I became an entrepreneur. This is my story, a story of how I accidentally stumbled into building a business from the ground up, and how I learned that the road to success isn't all shiny skyscrapers and fast cars. It started in 2018. I had been working in a mid-level marketing job at a company that I hated for almost 3 years. Every day felt like the same monotonous grind. I sat at my desk, typing away at emails and managing social media accounts for a brand that had no vision. I could barely keep myself awake some days, so I started daydreaming about doing something more, something that didn't involve submitting endless reports or attending pointless meetings. I had always been into technology and gadgets, especially smartphones. I could spend hours reading about the latest tech trends, new apps, and hardware innovations. But what really caught my attention was the rise of eco-friendly products. Everywhere I looked, people were talking about reducing plastic use, living sustainably, and supporting green businesses. It hit me one day, what if I could create a business that sold sustainable phone accessories? Not just any phone accessories, but high-quality, eco-friendly alternatives to the plastic-drenched options that were flooding the market. The idea felt perfect, technology and sustainability wrapped into one. I couldn't shake the thought, but I was terrified. I had no experience in manufacturing, no idea how to source products, and certainly no clue how to sell anything. But I couldn't ignore that nagging feeling. So, I did what any person in my position would do. I Googled everything I could about starting an e-commerce business. The first step was figuring out how to make my product idea a reality. I spent months researching eco-friendly materials. Bamboo, recycled plastics, biodegradable options. There were so many materials out there, but most of them weren't ideal for phone accessories. Eventually, I found a supplier in China that specialized in recycled ocean plastics. I was sold. This was it. This was the future of phone accessories. But I had no idea what to do next. I spent even more time researching how to create a website. I watched hours of YouTube tutorials on Shopify, learned about branding, and even took a few online courses on SEO and digital marketing. I spent every spare moment working on my business idea while still holding down my job. There was no time for rest. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. After about 6 months, I finally had a product, an eco-friendly phone case made from recycled ocean plastics. It was sleek, durable, and came in multiple colors. But there was one problem. No one knew who I was, and no one knew my brand. I had no followers, no email list, and no social proof. Starting from scratch was intimidating. I launched my website, and for the first month, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. I had spent all this time and energy building my business, and it felt like I was shouting into an empty room. But I couldn't give up. I kept pushing. I started reaching out to influencers in the sustainability space. Most of them ignored me, but a few responded positively. I sent them free samples of my phone cases in exchange for honest reviews. It was a small, tedious process, but it worked. Slowly but surely, my brand started to get noticed. A few influencers posted about my products, and their followers started checking out my website. Still, the sales were slow, but I was getting traction. I couldn't let up. But then, just when things started to look up, I hit a huge roadblock. My supplier, the one who was making the phone cases from recycled ocean plastics, contacted me and said they couldn't continue production. They had run into supply chain issues, and their factory was closing down for the foreseeable future. I was devastated. My entire business was built around this product. Without it, I had nothing. I didn't give up, though. I spent the next several weeks scrambling, looking for new suppliers. It wasn't easy, and every option I found felt like a compromise. The materials were either too expensive, of low quality, or just didn't fit the eco-friendly message I had been promoting. I even considered giving up entirely and going back to my marketing job, but something inside me refused to quit. Finally, after what felt like forever, I found a new supplier. They offered biodegradable phone cases made from a unique plant-based material. It wasn't recycled ocean plastic, but it was still sustainable, and I could stand behind it. I decided to go with it. I rebranded my business and launched the new product line. To my surprise, sales picked up again. It wasn't a huge jump, but it was steady. I was making enough to cover the costs and even start paying myself a small salary. It felt amazing. I was finally seeing the results of all my hard work. Over the next year, my business grew. Slowly but surely, I added new products, laptop sleeves, wireless chargers, and portable power banks, each made with eco-friendly materials. I also started collaborating with other green companies, helping to raise awareness for sustainable products. I learned more about digital marketing, SEO, and content creation than I ever thought possible. By 2021, my business was making 6 figures in revenue. I was finally able to quit my marketing job and go full-time into my business. I moved into a bigger apartment, hired my first employee, and started feeling like an actual entrepreneur. But it wasn't easy, and there were still challenges along the way. I had to learn to balance growth with sustainability, to handle the pressure of managing employees, and to deal with the never-ending issues that come with running a business. In 2023, I hit a huge milestone. My company was featured in a popular tech magazine as one of the top sustainable brands to watch. The recognition brought in more customers, more partnerships, and even more growth. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. The guy who used to hate his 9-to-5 job is now running a business that not only supports my lifestyle but also makes a positive impact on the environment. There are still days when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, but then I remember how far I've come, and I push forward. If you're reading this and wondering whether you could ever do something like I did, the answer is yes. I'm living proof that you don't need to be born with an entrepreneurial spirit or have an endless supply of capital. What you need is perseverance, a willingness to learn, and the courage to keep going even when things get tough. I'm still far from where I want to be, but I'm proud of what I've built. And every day I wake up grateful that I took that leap of faith. The road to success isn't easy, but it's worth it. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. My parents owned a local diner, and from a young age, I was taught that hard work was the only way to get ahead. I didn't exactly have the easiest childhood. There was no silver spoon, but there was plenty of grit. My parents worked long hours, and I helped out in the diner whenever I could. I was always the one making the milkshakes or refilling coffee cups for regulars. I didn't mind. I loved the place, and it felt like home, but there was always a part of me that wanted more. I had big dreams as a kid. While my classmates talked about becoming doctors or lawyers, I wanted to build something from scratch. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant at the time, but I knew I had a deep interest in business. I watched my parents struggle to make ends meet despite working hard every day, and I thought, there has to be a better way. That's when the idea of entrepreneurship first sparked in my mind. After high school, I decided I was going to leave my small town. I wanted to study business, and I ended up attending a college in a big city. The move was terrifying. It was the first time I had lived away from home, and the first time I had seen anything beyond the confines of my small town. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, I felt alive. The world seemed full of endless possibilities. College was a whirlwind. I was broke for most of it, barely scraping by with part-time jobs while taking on an ambitious course load. But there was something about it that lit a fire inside of me. I remember being in business classes and listening to professors talk about scaling companies, innovation, and taking risks. I started to imagine myself as one of those people who built something from the ground up. But I didn't just want to build any business. I wanted to create something that could make a real impact. By the time I graduated, I had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy. I knew that most startups fail, and the ones that do succeed often do so after years of struggle. But I didn't care. I was determined to give it a shot. After college, I moved back home for a short while to save up some money. I worked odd jobs, including freelancing in web development and graphic design. I learned a lot about marketing and branding in those years, and even though it wasn't exactly what I envisioned doing long-term, it gave me some valuable skills. During this time, I started to build an idea, a tech startup. I had learned a lot about app development in college, and I noticed that there was a gap in the market for a tool that could help small businesses manage their social media accounts more effectively. Small businesses didn't have the resources to hire large marketing teams or digital experts, and I thought, if I can make a tool that could streamline their social media management, it would be a game changer. The next couple of years were a blur. I spent countless nights coding, developing the app, and putting together a business plan. I had no idea what I was doing at first. I remember talking to my parents about my idea, and they were supportive but cautious. They didn't fully understand what I was trying to do, but they trusted me. They had been through their own struggles with their diner, and I think they wanted me to succeed. Still, it wasn't easy convincing other people. I would pitch my idea to investors and potential partners, only to get rejected again and again. There were so many moments where I thought about quitting, especially when I couldn't make rent or when my friends were already landing stable jobs while I was barely making it through the month. But somehow, I kept pushing forward. There was this drive inside me that I couldn't shake. I wanted to prove that all of my efforts and sacrifices would lead to something worthwhile. I kept coding, kept improving the app, and slowly started to see the first signs of progress. In my third year of working on the startup, something happened that would change everything. I met a group of developers at a tech conference who were looking to collaborate on projects for small businesses. I pitched them my idea, and to my surprise, they were interested. We spent the next few months refining the app together, bringing in new features and adding things that I hadn't even thought of before. They had more experience than me, and I learned so much from them during that time. Having a team finally made a huge difference. Once the app was in a solid place, it was time to start marketing it. I used the connections I had built over the years to get the word out, reaching out to small business owners and offering free trials. I knew that in the early days, getting traction was key. I offered the app for free to the first 100 businesses who signed up, and the response was overwhelming. Slowly, I started to get paying customers. Word of mouth started to spread, and before I knew it, the app was gaining some serious momentum. But just when I thought things were finally falling into place, I hit another roadblock. A competitor, a much bigger company with more resources, launched a similar product. I was devastated. The market was small, and now I was up against a company with a much larger budget for advertising and development. It felt like my dream was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea how to compete. Instead of throwing in the towel, I decided to pivot. I looked closely at the competitor's app and realized that they weren't solving the problem as effectively as I was. The user experience was clunky, and the support was subpar. So, I focused on improving those aspects, doubling down on customer service and personalization. I offered more customized solutions for small businesses, including tailored consultations to help them optimize their social media strategies. That pivot paid off. Slowly, we started to gain ground, and over time, my app began to develop a loyal customer base. I didn't beat the competitor on advertising dollars, but I won by offering something they couldn't: a personal touch and a dedication to making small businesses successful. Years later, the company is thriving. We've expanded our team, raised some funding, and are now developing new features that will continue to serve small businesses. There have been many ups and downs, and there are still challenges ahead. But looking back, I can honestly say that everything I've been through has been worth it. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I've created something meaningful, and I'm proud of the work I've done. More importantly, I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about having a big idea. It's about persistence, learning from mistakes, and making decisions that are in line with your values. I may have started with nothing more than a small-town background and a dream, but I built something that helps people every day, and that's something I never take for granted. I still remember the days when I was struggling to make rent, working from my tiny apartment, wondering if it was all worth it. But now I know that it was. If you're just starting out, my advice is this: keep pushing forward. Success isn't immediate, and it isn't easy, but if you stay true to your vision, it'll happen. It's a long journey, but every step brings you closer to the person you're meant to become. Don't give up. I never imagined that I'd be here, typing this story out for the world to see. It's a strange feeling, like looking at your reflection after years of growth and realizing just how much has changed. I guess you could say I was just an ordinary guy, living an ordinary life, until one decision led me to leave it all behind. It all started with a terrible day at work. I had been employed as a marketing executive at a medium-sized firm for almost 5 years, and I had hit the glass ceiling. At first, I was content with my position. I was climbing the corporate ladder, meeting deadlines, getting the bonuses, and feeling like I was moving forward. But then, I started to feel stuck. There was a certain monotony to everything. The excitement had drained away. My friends would always say, "You've got it made. You're lucky to have a steady job." But deep down, I knew I wasn't happy. I'd been doing a lot of thinking about my life. What was I really passionate about? What would make me excited to get out of bed every morning? At that point, I had a few hobbies, like photography and playing around with digital designs, but nothing that seemed like it could be a career. One day, on a whim, I started playing around with graphic design software during my lunch break. I had watched a few YouTube tutorials, and suddenly, it all clicked. I found myself experimenting with designs, learning new tools, and enjoying every minute of it. That was the spark that lit the fire. I realized I wanted to be a designer, not just for fun, but as a career. The thought of creating something from scratch, something people could use, was incredibly exciting to me. But the fear crept in quickly. I can't just quit my job. I have responsibilities. I'm not a trained designer. What if I fail? Still, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was my shot. I'd been stuck in the same routine for years, doing something that didn't fulfill me. Why should I let fear control my life? It was a scary thought, But deep down, I knew that if I didn't take the leap, I'd always wonder, what if? So, I did something drastic. I quit my job. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I enrolled in an online design course, which I could barely afford but knew I needed. I reached out to freelance clients, offering my services at a fraction of the cost just to build a portfolio. I spent every waking moment working on designs, perfecting my craft. It was exhausting. I was living off savings, eating ramen, and working at all hours of the night. There were days I wanted to give up. It felt like the world was moving so fast, and I was barely keeping up. But I pushed through. At the start, I didn't have any significant clients. I worked on small projects like logos for friends, mock-ups for local businesses, and even some web designs for nonprofits. Every time a project was finished, I felt this sense of pride. It was like a small victory, proving to myself that I could do it. Slowly, the clients began to trickle in. And then, one day, a company I had admired for years contacted me. They were a fast-growing tech startup in need of a full rebrand. The job paid well, much more than anything I had done before. I was terrified. I had only been doing this full-time for a few months. Was I ready for a project like this? But I took a deep breath and said yes. It was an incredible opportunity, one that I knew I couldn't pass up. It was a turning point. The project consumed me. I worked around the clock, designing everything from their website to their app interface. Every day felt like an uphill battle, but each step forward was a huge accomplishment. When the project was finally complete, it was the moment I'd been waiting for. I had created something meaningful for a company that truly valued my work. Not only that, but the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. They were thrilled with the result. I remember that feeling of validation, of knowing I had made the right choice to pursue this. That project led to more projects, and more, and more. Eventually, I was able to hire a small team, 2 designers and a developer. We worked together to bring even bigger ideas to life, and I found myself not just creating, but managing the creative process for larger brands. But even as my business grew, I never lost sight of why I started in the first place: to create, to innovate, and to push the boundaries of what I thought was possible. Over the years, I've had my share of struggles. There were months when the pipeline of projects was thin. There were clients who didn't pay on time, and there were deadlines that felt impossible. But each of those challenges taught me something valuable. I learned how to manage a team, how to work with clients, and how to handle the financial side of running a business. There were sacrifices too. I worked weekends, holidays, and even birthdays. I missed events and time with loved ones. I was building something important, but at times, I felt like I was losing sight of what really mattered. It took time, but I eventually found balance. I started delegating more, learning to trust my team, and giving myself permission to take breaks when I needed them. Looking back now, I realized just how far I've come. I went from a marketing exec with a 9-to-5 job to the owner of a successful design agency. My company works with some of the biggest names in tech, and we've expanded into other areas of digital innovation. But it wasn't just the business success that mattered. It was the personal growth. I've learned more about myself in the last few years than I ever thought possible. I'm no longer afraid to take risks or step into the unknown. The journey hasn't been easy. In fact, it's been one of the hardest things I've ever done. But every sacrifice, every late night, every failure has been worth it. It's easy to look at people who've succeeded and think they have it easy, but the reality is, it's a constant hustle. It's about having the courage to keep going, even when you feel like giving up. And I guess, at the end of the day, that's what entrepreneurship is all about. It's not about the money or the fame. It's about pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible, trusting in your abilities, and believing in the power of persistence. If I can do it, anyone can. If you're reading this and wondering if you should take the leap, my advice is simple. If you're passionate about something, if it's in your heart and you can't stop thinking about it, go for it. There's never going to be a perfect time. There's only now. Keep pushing, keep creating, and keep believing. It all started with a broken coffee machine and a stubborn belief that I could solve it. My name is Jack, and I'm the founder of BrewTech, a small tech company that builds smart coffee machines for the modern office. But the road here wasn't a straight line. It was full of curveballs, odd jobs, late nights, and endless moments of doubt. This is my journey from a guy who couldn't even fix his own coffee machine to running a growing company that's changing how people drink coffee at work. Let me take you back to when this all began. I had just graduated with a degree in computer engineering, and I was working a 9-to-5 job as a junior developer at a software company. The work was fine, nothing exciting, but it paid the bills. The only problem was that I was bored out of my mind. I spent most of my time daydreaming about something I could build, something that would make a difference. But I didn't know what that was yet. One morning, the coffee machine at the office broke down. It was one of those fancy, high-end machines with all the bells and whistles. It could grind beans, brew espresso, and even froth milk with the push of a button. Everyone relied on it. So when it stopped working, chaos ensued. People were grumpy, the productivity of the office tanked, and the atmosphere felt off. I figured this was my chance to make myself useful. I was a tech guy, after all. How hard could it be to fix a coffee machine? I grabbed a screwdriver and opened the back of the machine, expecting to see some simple wiring issue. Instead, I was met with a mess of cables, sensors, and components that made absolutely no sense to me. It wasn't just a coffee machine, it was a complex piece of technology that had all the parts of a small robot inside it. I spent hours trying to figure out what went wrong. I looked up schematics, watched YouTube videos, and even contacted the manufacturer for advice, but nothing worked. Eventually, I gave up. The coffee machine remained broken for days, and people in the office were getting increasingly desperate. One day, as I was sitting in the break room, I overheard a conversation between two colleagues. They were talking about how great it would be if coffee machines at work were smarter, if they could tell you when to refill the beans, remind you when it was time to clean, or even suggest new types of coffee based on your preferences. That's when it hit me. Maybe there was an opportunity here. What if I could create a coffee machine that wasn't just about brewing coffee, but about making the whole experience smarter and more enjoyable? I went home that night and began sketching ideas for what this smart coffee machine could look like. I had no experience in hardware design, but I knew I could combine my software background with some basic electrical engineering skills to create something unique. I started researching IT, Internet of Things, devices, sensors, and machine learning algorithms. I had a rough idea in my mind, a coffee machine that could learn your habits, keep track of your coffee supply, and even suggest new blends based on your taste preferences. The next few months were a blur of late nights, countless cups of coffee, and lots of frustration. I began building prototypes in my garage using spare parts from old electronics I had lying around. The first version of my machine was bulky, unreliable, and barely functional, but it worked well enough to brew coffee and send notifications to a phone app. I was onto something. I decided to take a leap of faith and quit my job. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was what I was meant to do. I had no idea if anyone would buy my coffee machine, but I had to try. With a small savings fund and a couple of credit cards maxed out, I rented a tiny office space and set up shop. I poured my energy into refining the machine, designing a user-friendly app, and figuring out how to manufacture it at scale. The first major hurdle came when I tried to get investors on board. I had no business background, no experience in hardware manufacturing, and no track record of success. I was essentially a guy with a half-baked idea and a prototype that only kind of worked. I applied to every accelerator program I could find, and I pitched my idea to dozens of venture capitalists. Rejections piled up, but I wasn't ready to give up. I kept tweaking the prototype, improving the software, and perfecting the coffee-making process. Then, one day, I got an email from a startup accelerator in Silicon Valley. They wanted to meet with me. After a grueling pitch session, they decided to take a chance on me. They provided some initial funding and introduced me to a network of mentors and experts who helped me refine my product and business model. With their guidance, I was able to improve my coffee machine and turn it into a sleek, functional device that would eventually become the backbone of BrewTech. Once the product was ready, I faced another challenge: how to get people to notice. I didn't have the budget for a massive marketing campaign, so I turned to social media and word of mouth. I reached out to coffee influencers, tech bloggers, and anyone who might be interested in spreading the word. Slowly but surely, people started talking about my smart coffee machine. Orders trickled in, and I was able to scale up production. In the early days, I lived off ramen and took odd jobs to keep the lights on. I worked weekends doing freelance web development, and I used the money to fund the business. But as more people bought the machine, things started to snowball. We expanded our team, improved our supply chain, and began developing new features for the app that would make our machines even smarter. We added voice commands, personalized coffee recommendations, and integration with office productivity tools like Slack and Google Calendar. Our machines became more than just coffee makers. They became part of the office ecosystem. Fast forward a few years, and BrewTech is no longer a one-man operation. We now have a team of 50 people, including engineers, designers, and customer service reps. Our smart coffee machines are in offices all over the world, and we've expanded into retail, offering our products directly to consumers. We've even built a community of coffee lovers who share recipes, tips, and experiences with each other. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. There were so many moments when I wanted to quit, when the challenges seemed too big to overcome. But each setback taught me something valuable. I learned that success doesn't come overnight. It comes from persistence, resilience, and a willingness to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead seems uncertain. BrewTech isn't just about coffee. It's about solving problems and creating something that people love and use every day. And every morning when I take that first sip of coffee, I can't help but feel proud of how far I've come and excited for what's next. This is a story of how I went from being a broke college student to running my own successful e-commerce business. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of failures along the way, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's a story of hard work, perseverance, and learning to embrace risk. It all started in 2017. I was attending a state university, studying business administration, but I was struggling. I wasn't a bad student, but college life was expensive, and the student loans were piling up. On top of that, I had no real idea what I wanted to do after graduation. My family wasn't well off, and they couldn't help me financially, so I had to find a way to support myself. One evening, after a long day of classes and work, I was scrolling through Reddit, as I usually did to procrastinate. I came across a post about dropshipping. Now, I had heard of it before but never really looked into it. The post was from a guy who had started his own dropshipping business and was making thousands of dollars every month. I didn't understand how it worked, but the idea intrigued me. I thought, maybe I could give this a shot. I don't have anything to lose. At that point, I had about $200 left to my name, after paying for rent, food, and my textbooks. It wasn't much, but I figured I could try something. I spent the next few nights researching everything I could about dropshipping, Shopify, and Facebook ads. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was determined to make it work. After a week of research, I launched my first store. I picked a niche, something I thought was unique enough to stand out. It was a pet store. At the time, I thought pet products had high potential because everyone loves their pets, and they're willing to spend money on them. I found a supplier who would dropship products for me, and I created a simple Shopify website. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. I spent $100 of my last $200 on Facebook ads. I remember sitting there anxiously, checking my ad results every hour. The first day went by with no sales. The second day, still no sales. I was getting frustrated, but I didn't give up. I tweaked my ad targeting, adjusted the copy, and kept going. By the third day, I made my first sale. It was a $30 order, and I felt like I had just won the lottery. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I reinvested that $30 into more ads. Over the next few weeks, I kept making small sales, but nothing consistent. I was spending more on ads than I was making in revenue. It was a grind, but I was learning. I started reading everything I could find about online marketing, sales funnels, and customer psychology. I adjusted my website, optimized my ads, and tried different strategies. Then, just as I was starting to lose hope, something changed. I decided to take a risk and increase my ad spend significantly. I was scared, but I thought, if I want to make this work, I need to go big or go home. I spent the next $100 on ads and finally started to see results. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, I began getting sales. Slowly, but surely, my store started to make consistent revenue. I'll be honest, those early months were rough. I wasn't making enough to quit my part-time job, but I was making just enough to cover my costs and put a little bit away for the future. I realized that my success wasn't going to come overnight. But every sale, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I learned to embrace failure and to keep moving forward. Fast forward to 2018, a year after I first launched my dropshipping store. I had refined my business model, optimized my ads, and was generating steady sales. I had learned how to build a brand, manage customer service, and scale ads. My business was no longer just a side hustle, it was becoming a full-time gig. I hit my first major milestone in early 2019. I made $10 in a single month. I had quit my part-time job a few months before that, and I was working full-time on my e-commerce business. The money was starting to flow, but I also realized that scaling a business wasn't as simple as running ads and getting sales. I had to learn about inventory management, dealing with suppliers, and most importantly, how to handle customer complaints. By the end of 2019, my business had grown significantly, and I had hired my first employee to help with customer service. I was no longer handling everything on my own, and it felt like a huge relief. But the growth didn't come without its challenges. As my business scaled, I had to deal with growing pains, supply chain issues, customer service nightmares, and the constant pressure of managing cash flow. I was learning how to lead a team, but I was also realizing that the bigger the business got, the harder it was to manage everything by myself. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and everything changed. The world went into lockdown, and suddenly, e-commerce was booming. My sales skyrocketed, and I had to hire more people to keep up with the demand. But with the surge in sales came new challenges. Shipping delays became a nightmare, and I had to find new suppliers to meet the demand. It was a stressful time, but I learned to adapt quickly and make decisions on the fly. By the end of 2020, my business was generating over $500,000 in revenue. I was no longer just an entrepreneur, I was the CEO of a growing company. But even then, I didn't feel like I had made it. I was still learning and facing challenges every day. The journey was far from over. Today, in 2025, I run a thriving e-commerce business with a team of 15 employees. We've expanded our product offerings, built a loyal customer base, and continue to grow. I've learned countless lessons along the way, but the most important lesson I've learned is that failure is just part of the process. You have to be willing to take risks, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward. Entrepreneurship is a long, hard road, but it's also one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. I look back at that scared, broke college student and can't believe how far I've come. I still have big dreams for the future, but I'm proud of what I've built. And to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, do it. It's not going to be easy, and there will be plenty of sleepless nights, but if you keep learning, stay persistent, and embrace the process, it can change your life in ways you can't even imagine. I'll start this story by telling you that I never imagined I would end up where I am today. I grew up in a small town where my parents worked hard to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough to get by. My parents always told me to follow my dreams, and I remember hearing their words every time I felt lost or uncertain. Little did I know, those words would guide me through one of the hardest, most rewarding journeys of my life. It all started in my early 20s. I had just graduated from college with a degree in business. The world seemed full of possibilities, but reality hit me hard when I couldn't find a job. I applied to countless positions, each one more discouraging than the last. Rejection after rejection started to weigh heavily on me. At that time, I thought success meant landing a prestigious job at a big corporation, but it was clear that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. One evening, while scrolling through job listings on my laptop, I saw an ad that would change everything. It wasn't for a job at a company, it was for a startup pitch competition. The prize? $10,000, and the chance to have your idea funded by a group of angel investors. I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but I knew this was my shot. I had always been passionate about fitness, and one day it hit me, what if I could combine my love for fitness with technology? My idea was to create a fitness app that didn't just track workouts but actually provided personalized workout plans based on data from users' health devices. It sounded ambitious, but it felt right. I stayed up all night creating a pitch deck. It wasn't perfect, but I poured my heart into it. I submitted the application and, to my surprise, got selected for the competition. I had no business experience, no investors, and no team, but I was determined to make it work. When I walked into the competition room, I was overwhelmed. There were people who had actual businesses, real products, and teams behind them. I felt like a fish out of water. But as I took the stage and began presenting my idea, something clicked. I was passionate about what I was talking about, and that passion seemed to resonate with the judges. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then they started asking me questions. For the first time in my life, I was answering questions that I knew the answers to. It felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. By the end of the night, they announced the winner, and it was me. I couldn't believe it. I had just won $10,000, and more importantly, I had a group of investors interested in helping me turn my idea into a reality. That's when things really started to get complicated. With the money I had won, I started working on the app. But soon, I realized just how much I didn't know. I needed to hire developers, designers, marketers, and lawyers to help me build the product. I was barely making ends meet and struggling to pay my bills, but I kept telling myself that I couldn't give up. The early days were brutal. I spent countless hours learning about app development, reading books, watching videos, and talking to anyone who would listen. I was obsessed. But despite all my hard work, the product wasn't coming together as quickly as I had hoped. The developers I hired didn't share my vision, and the app's design was lacking. I started to feel like I was in over my head. There were days when I wanted to quit, but I kept reminding myself of the people who believed in me, and most importantly, I reminded myself of my dream. Then came the turning point. I had a meeting with one of the investors who had backed me in the pitch competition. He was an older man with years of experience, and he could tell I was struggling. He sat me down and said, "You can't do it all yourself. You need a team that shares your vision." It was a wake-up call. I had been trying to do everything on my own, thinking that if I just worked harder, it would all come together. But I needed help. So I took a step back and reassessed my approach. I began building a team of people who were as passionate about the project as I was. I hired a talented developer who shared my vision, a designer who understood the user experience, and a marketing expert who knew how to make our app stand out. Together, we began to build the app from the ground up, and this time, it was different. The energy was there. We worked long hours, often late into the night, but it felt like we were making real progress. After months of work, we finally had a beta version of the app ready to test. The first round of feedback was overwhelming. It was everything I had hoped for. People loved the concept, and they were excited to see how it could improve their workouts. But there were still bugs, and the design wasn't perfect. We spent the next few months refining the app, fixing the issues, and listening to user feedback. When we finally launched the app, I was both nervous and excited. It felt like the culmination of all the hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices. But something even better happened. The app started gaining traction. People were downloading it, sharing it, and leaving positive reviews. Our user base grew faster than we could have imagined, and soon, we were featured on major tech blogs and social media platforms. As the app gained popularity, we started attracting more investors, and our team grew. The success wasn't overnight, and there were plenty of hurdles along the way, but it felt like every challenge was an opportunity to learn and improve. I kept thinking back to my early struggles and how far I had come. I never thought I'd be here, running a successful startup with a growing team, but here I was. Today, my app has over 1 million active users, and it continues to grow. We've expanded our features, partnered with major fitness brands, and even launched a subscription model that helps keep the business sustainable. Looking back, I realized that success wasn't just about the app, it was about the journey. It was about learning to trust myself, finding the right people to work with, and never giving up, even when things seemed impossible. So, if there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that success isn't a straight path. It's filled with setbacks, failures, and moments of doubt. But if you're willing to keep going, to learn from your mistakes, and to never lose sight of your vision, anything is possible. I'm living proof of that. I've never been one to shy away from challenges, but looking back, I can honestly say I didn't know the first thing about running a business when I started. Sure, I had dreams, a lot of them, but no idea how to actually make them happen. This is the story of how I went from having no clue to building a successful business from the ground up, and why, even now, I still don't think of myself as a traditional entrepreneur. It all started in my early 20s. I had just graduated from college with a degree in graphic design. It wasn't a prestigious degree, but it was one I loved. I'd spent years developing my skills and felt confident that I could turn it into something lucrative. But, as it is with many fresh graduates, I quickly learned that the world outside of school wasn't exactly what I expected. The reality check hit hard. I sent out countless resumes, networked with every person I met, and even took on some freelance gigs. But the market was tough, and jobs were scarce. Around this time, I had a conversation with a friend who was already deep into the world of digital marketing. He had just launched his own agency and was raking in clients. I'll never forget the way he talked about his work, passionate, excited, and genuinely thrilled about the future. He made it seem so easy, and honestly, I felt a pang of jealousy. After all, here I was, struggling to even get an interview, and he was running his own business. But instead of feeling down, I felt inspired. Maybe I didn't need to follow the traditional path. Maybe I could create my own way forward. One day, I had an epiphany. I'd been designing websites and creating graphics for various clients, and I loved it. But there was a glaring issue. I was charging so little for my work that I couldn't sustain a full-time business. That's when I decided to go bigger. I'd already done a few web design projects for small businesses, and they'd been happy with the results. So, I thought, why not target businesses directly and offer them a full-service package? I would design their websites, handle their digital marketing, and essentially become a one-stop shop for everything online. At first, I was terrified. I had no formal business experience and no idea how to approach clients or scale up. But I was determined to try. I started small. I reached out to businesses I knew through personal connections, restaurants, small retail shops, a couple of local startups. I didn't have a formal pitch or a fancy portfolio. All I had was my work and a burning desire to prove that I could help them succeed. My first few clients came through referrals, and I ended up working with them on everything from brand design to social media marketing. Slowly but surely, I began to build a reputation. People started seeing the value in what I was offering, and soon enough, I had more work than I could handle on my own. But here's where things got complicated. As I started to take on more clients, I realized I was burning the candle at both ends. I couldn't keep up with the demand. I was designing, coding, running ads, and managing the back end of multiple projects all at once. The work was starting to affect my personal life. I was exhausted, and my productivity was plummeting. That's when I made my first real decision as an entrepreneur. I needed to hire help. I'll admit, at first, I was hesitant. I was worried about the financial commitment. Hiring someone meant paying a salary, handling taxes, and dealing with the headaches that come with managing employees. But, at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep up this pace alone. I started by hiring a freelance designer to help with some of the website mockups and a project manager to assist with client communication and scheduling. It wasn't easy. Learning to delegate was a massive struggle, but it was the turning point I needed. As time went on, I brought more people onto the team. I focused on scaling up the business in a way that didn't sacrifice quality. We started implementing systems for everything, from onboarding new clients to managing payments and keeping track of projects. Slowly, the stress of juggling everything on my own started to dissipate. I was able to focus more on the big picture, building long-term relationships with clients, exploring new marketing strategies, and expanding our service offerings. There were plenty of failures along the way, of course. Some clients didn't work out, and I lost a few big accounts because we didn't deliver exactly what they wanted. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I learned quickly that failure isn't the end. It's a lesson. Each setback taught me something valuable, whether it was about pricing, client expectations, or even how to handle difficult conversations. As the company grew, we started attracting bigger clients, including some well-known brands in the tech and e-commerce space. These were high-stakes projects, and the pressure was immense. There were moments when I thought we had bitten off more than we could chew. But those moments were also some of the most rewarding. We met deadlines, exceeded client expectations, and got to the point where referrals were coming in left and right. For the first time, I felt like the business was truly on autopilot. But as much as I loved the success, I knew that I wasn't the same person I was when I started. The excitement of launching a new business had faded, replaced by the grind of running one. I spent more time analyzing financials, managing employees, and negotiating deals than I did doing the creative work I initially loved. And honestly, that made me realize that what I really loved wasn't the business itself, but the process of building it. At that point, I took a step back. I began to focus on other passions I had neglected, like mentoring young entrepreneurs, diving deeper into the world of artificial intelligence, and even exploring different ways to automate parts of our business. I learned that being a successful entrepreneur wasn't just about running a business. It was about creating something bigger than yourself, and then letting it evolve. So, here I am now, in my 30s, still running the business, but with a new perspective. I don't think of myself as a traditional entrepreneur. I'm a creator. I build things, nurture them, and help them grow. I've learned to let go of the need for control, and I'm grateful for the freedom that has allowed me to find a balance between work and life. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone starting out, it would be this: don't be afraid to dive in. You won't have all the answers at first, and that's okay. What matters is that you're willing to learn, grow, and adapt along the way. And always remember, success isn't a straight line. There will be setbacks, but every failure is just another opportunity to improve. Starting this journey wasn't easy, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. The ups, the downs, the struggles, and the triumphs all shaped me into who I am today, and it's a journey I'm incredibly proud of. I was 28 when I first considered starting my own business. Looking back, I can't quite figure out why it took me that long, but I guess life has a funny way of making you second-guess everything until you finally take that leap. I had always wanted to run my own show, but I didn't have the confidence back then. I worked in a dead-end office job for years after college, barely scraping by on a modest salary. It wasn't a bad job, but it definitely wasn't what I wanted to do forever. Every morning felt like a chore, and every night I would tell myself, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I grew up in a small town where people didn't often talk about ambition. If you didn't inherit your family's business, you went to school, got a decent job, and lived a simple life. There wasn't much talk about chasing dreams or hustling. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. The few people I knew who seemed to have their stuff together often worked in big cities and had fancy job titles I couldn't even pronounce. So I did what felt safe, stuck to my 9 to 5, and tried to avoid rocking the boat. That changed one day when I got laid off. The company I worked for had been downsizing for months, and I had heard the rumors, but still, nothing prepared me for the moment my boss called me into his office and handed me a box. It was the strangest feeling. One minute, I was just sitting at my desk, and the next, I was out of a job with nothing but a severance check and a lot of questions swirling in my head. I spent the first couple of weeks moping around. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. The idea of jumping straight into another corporate job felt draining. It took a few weeks of seriously reflecting before it hit me. This was my chance to start something of my own. I wasn't getting any younger, and I had the time. The fear that had always kept me stuck was gone. There was no safety net anymore, and I realized that if I didn't try now, I might never try. I didn't want to do anything too risky at first, so I decided to look into something that combined my interests and skills. I had always been a bit of a tech nerd, spending most of my free time experimenting with gadgets, building computers, and learning about coding. I loved the idea of automating things and finding solutions to everyday problems with technology. After some research, I figured that tech consulting could be a good way to get my foot in the door. So, I set up a website and started offering my services to local businesses that needed help with everything from streamlining their operations to improving their online presence. I remember the first client I got, a small retail store struggling to make sense of its inventory. The store owner had no idea how to keep track of stock or sales, and it was a mess. It was a simple job, but it paid well enough to give me a taste of what it might be like to do this full-time. Over the next few months, I picked up more clients, and my reputation grew. People started recommending me to others, and I was busy enough to think that maybe I could make a real go of this. But I hit a plateau. I was working with small businesses, but the projects weren't large enough to scale. I was making money, but I was still stuck in the freelancer mindset, hopping from job to job, struggling to figure out how to build something bigger. One day, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop, looking at all the other entrepreneurs and wondering what they were doing that I wasn't. That's when I decided to pivot. Instead of offering piecemeal services to businesses, I started focusing on creating a software product that could solve a common problem: inefficient inventory management. I knew from my earlier consulting work that businesses, especially small ones, struggled with inventory, and many didn't have the resources to invest in expensive enterprise software. So I thought, why not create something affordable and easy to use? It was a gamble. I had no experience building software from scratch. I could code, but I had never worked on a project this big. Still, I figured I'd have to learn somehow, so I dove headfirst into the world of software development. I spent nights learning coding languages, testing ideas, and building prototypes. I taught myself everything I could about the software industry, business strategy, and what it took to market a product. I had no roadmap, and at times, it felt like I was stumbling through the dark, but every small victory kept me going. Fast forward to a year later, and I had a working prototype. I started reaching out to my previous clients, offering them a chance to test the product. To my surprise, many of them jumped at the chance. Feedback started pouring in, and I quickly realized I had something that people wanted. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it worked well enough that businesses were willing to pay for it. I spent the next 6 months tweaking the product, optimizing the user experience, and working on marketing. I hired a couple of freelancers to help with design and marketing, and we created a simple website to showcase the software. I started running ads on social media, reaching out to influencers in the small business community and offering free trials. Slowly but surely, we started gaining traction. The first time I made a sale online felt surreal. I remember refreshing my email inbox and seeing that someone had signed up and paid for the full version of the software. It was the validation I needed, and from there, things started to snowball. The more businesses I reached, the more sales I made. By the end of that first year, my software company had grown from a side project to a full-fledged business, with recurring customers and a growing team. Building the company wasn't easy, and there were plenty of moments when I doubted myself, but I stuck with it. The more I learned about business, the more confident I became in my ability to scale. I invested in customer support, continuously improved the software, and eventually expanded to offer additional tools and services to our clients. We grew our client base, expanded our product offerings, and started making a name for ourselves in the small business tech space. Today, my company is thriving. We have a dedicated team, a customer base that spans the country, and a product that continues to evolve. I'm not where I thought I'd be when I started, but I've learned that there's no perfect time to start a business. You can't wait until everything aligns. You just have to jump in and figure it out as you go. I still don't have all the answers, but I know one thing for sure. The best decisions I ever made were the ones that scared me the most. Now, I spend my days working on the business, brainstorming new features, and helping my team grow. I've learned a lot, and while I know there will always be new challenges ahead, I'm excited to face them. If you're reading this and wondering whether you should take the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is simple. Take the first step. It won't be easy, and it won't be perfect, but it will be worth it. You'll never know what you're capable of until you try. This is the story of how I went from a broke 22-year-old with no idea how to start a business to running a 7-figure e-commerce company, all thanks to a simple idea and some hard lessons along the way. It's a long ride, but hopefully, it'll inspire someone to take that first step and keep going, even when it seems like everything is stacked against you. Back in 2015, I graduated from college with a degree in business, but no real plan. I had no money, no network, and no real-world skills beyond what I learned in textbooks. My parents weren't rich. They'd worked hard to get me through school, but they weren't in a position to give me a leg up. So when I graduated, I went straight into job hunting, hoping for some miracle job offer to fall into my lap. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. I spent months applying for jobs. No callbacks. No interviews. I had a few friends who were lucky enough to get jobs at big corporations, but I was left feeling like I was missing something. The truth was, I was in a huge rush to start my life but didn't realize that I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was a real slap in the face. Around that time, I started thinking about starting my own business. I wasn't sure what it would be at first, but I figured I could sell something. I had no money to start with, so I thought about dropshipping as an option. For those of you who don't know, dropshipping is a business model where you sell products to customers without having to keep inventory. When someone places an order, you purchase the product from a supplier who ships it directly to the customer. It sounded like a dream come true. Minimal investment, no need for a warehouse, and you could do it all from your laptop. I dove headfirst into learning everything I could about it, watching YouTube videos, reading blogs, signing up for courses. I was hungry, eager, and ready to go. But that's when I learned my first hard lesson. Dropshipping isn't as easy as it sounds. I found a niche that seemed perfect. Fitness products. I knew a lot about fitness, having been into it for a few years, and there were plenty of products to sell. I spent weeks building a website on Shopify, setting up a Facebook page, creating ads, and getting everything ready to launch. The day I went live was exciting. I felt like I had just built something from scratch, and I couldn't wait to see those sales roll in. Nothing happened. I mean, literally nothing. I was getting no traffic, no sales, and no attention. I spent money on Facebook ads, but it wasn't converting. I thought maybe my product wasn't right, or maybe I hadn't found the right audience. So I tried tweaking everything, changing my ads, my website, and even the products I was selling. But the results were the same, a whole lot of nothing. I had burned through my small savings on ads, and I was at the point where I was about to give up. But I didn't. Instead of quitting, I took a step back and started analyzing what was wrong. I looked at successful dropshipping stores, studied what they were doing, and realized that I was missing something crucial: branding and customer trust. I had approached dropshipping like it was just about selling products. I didn't realize that people buy from stores they trust, and my store didn't inspire confidence. My website looked generic, and my ads were bland. I wasn't offering any unique value to the customer. So, I decided to start over. I spent weeks rebuilding my brand from scratch. I made my website more user-friendly, updated the design, and spent time writing compelling copy that focused on the benefits of the products rather than just listing features. I also started engaging with potential customers on social media, sharing fitness tips, posting workout routines, and offering value before trying to sell anything. Slowly but surely, it started to pay off. I wasn't making tons of money, but I was getting some sales. At first, they were small orders, but each one felt like a win. I kept reinvesting the little profits I made into better ads, more targeted Facebook campaigns, and influencer partnerships. Slowly, I started building a small following. Over time, I learned how to optimize my store, how to use email marketing, and how to run more effective ad campaigns. But even though things were improving, I was still struggling. The business wasn't exactly growing as fast as I'd hoped. I was still working part-time jobs to make ends meet, trying to balance customer service with creating new content. Then, in late 2017, I hit a turning point that changed everything. I had been running a promotion on Instagram, partnering with influencers to showcase my products. One of the influencers I worked with posted about my store, and it went viral. I woke up the next day to a ton of notifications, orders were flooding in, my website was crashing, and I couldn't keep up with the demand. I remember feeling overwhelmed but excited at the same time. This was my chance. I immediately started outsourcing parts of the business to scale faster. I hired virtual assistants to handle customer service and product sourcing. I also invested in automation tools for email marketing and social media scheduling. I knew that if I didn't take full advantage of this sudden spike in attention, I'd lose the momentum. In the months that followed, I expanded my product line, hired a small team, and focused on improving the customer experience. The next year, we hit 6 figures in revenue. That was a huge milestone. By 2019, I was running the business full-time, and the company was on track to hit 7 figures. It felt like everything I had worked for was finally coming together. But of course, it wasn't easy. There were still plenty of challenges ahead. I had to figure out how to manage cash flow, deal with angry customers, and keep up with competition. The stress of scaling a business was real, but I had learned enough to keep pushing forward. Now, in 2025, my company is a successful e-commerce brand with a dedicated customer base and a solid online presence. We've expanded beyond dropshipping into creating our own products, and we have a team of 20 people. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't about having the perfect idea right away. It was about learning, adapting, and pushing through the tough times. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Don't expect overnight success. It's going to be hard, and you'll probably fail at some point. But keep learning, keep adapting, and never give up. There's no formula for success, but with hard work and perseverance, you can get there. And remember, your journey will be unique. Mine was messy and full of mistakes, but I wouldn't change a thing. I had to go through all of it to get to where I am today. So take that first step, even if it feels terrifying, because you never know where it might lead. Keep hustling, and good luck. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.